Should Muslims and anti-imperialists support China or Russia? An open message to George Galloway, Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton, Hasan Piker, CounterPunch, and the Grayzone, and how to deal with Americans. Should Palestine supporters support China and Russia? Do Tankies belong in the anti-war movement? Should Marxists, communists, and socialists support China and Russia? Neocons crying wolf. Remember, the lesser of two evils is still evil, and the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. Penn Jillette. Part 1. Asking the question. I've seen many people within Western political distance circles, the alternate media, or anti-imperialists who support China and or Russia as opposition to Western imperialism and support one or both states. To prove to you that I do not work for the CIA, MI6, been bribed, been kidnapped, received death threats, or have been hacked, here are articles that I have written. Terrorism and Why Do Muslims Hate Us? The issue of Iran and the Iran nuclear deal. Foreign policy, imperialism, and being policemen in the world. Do they really hate us for our freedom? And are anti-war people weak? Plus American exceptionalism. The best anti-war, pro-peace, and libertarian foreign policy websites, blogs, and YouTube channels. Plus a resource list to use for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And here's Scott Horton's debate with Bill Kristol. And Horton is one of the very best anti-war commentators in America. As you can clearly see, I am extremely critical of American foreign policy and Western foreign policy. More accurately, the foreign policy of the United States, United Kingdom, and France. I'm critical of American wars for Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the military-industrial complex, and French and general European neocolonialism in Africa. Does that mean that China or Russia are any better? I highly recommend reading the novel 1984 by George Orwell. A summary of how society works is described in Oceania 1984 by the Templin Institute. I'll admit that there have been a few occasions where either Russia or China has been the lesser evil. Penn and Teller, Dalai Lama in Tibet. Likewise, I believe that it would be a lesser evil for Afghanistan to become another Central Asian dictatorship than be taken over by religious fanatics, as the people would probably have more freedom under a secular dictatorship than ruled by the Taliban. Part 1. Russia. Do you dislike boomers? In Russia, their boomer is the Vatnik. What is a Vatnik? The Russian Boomer by NFKRZ. Vatnik is a term that basically describes the Russian Boomer. It's a term referring to a person who is very xenophobic, who hates every single country from the West, who hates the United States, who hates Ukraine, praises the borderline authoritarian regime of Vladimir Putin, and thinks that he lives in the best country in the world, and that everyone is out to who get them. Thinks that the Russian people apparently have a specific mission in this world, and they would also imply that if you do not agree with them, and if you do not agree with what's going on in Russia right now, you should just immigrate to America, because that's where your place is, because you're not a true patriot and you don't love Russia enough. If you want to know what the epitome of a Vatnik is, look no further than Alexander Dugin. Do not dismiss him as an escaped mental patient who mixes God knows what with his vodka. Watch What is Duginism and Why It Matters by Freedom Alternative. Don't take Freedom Alternative's word for it. James Corbett has talked about this as well, and Corbett does not like any government, period. The enemy of my enemy. Bonus. Another person has made, will Vladimir Putin save the world? Basically, Duginism is a strategy and totalitarian philosophy for advancing the dream of a Russia-centric Eurasian world. A Soviet Union 2.0, if you will. Another good comparison would be Orwell's 1984's Eurasia, which in Orwell's world has neo-Bolshevism as its ideology, rather than National Bolshevism in Dugin's world. Part of this is making other countries like Finland, which are nominally independent, pretty much subservient to the Russian state. The left and the right has done virtually nothing to combat Duginism because they do not know what it is, and partially because they are too hysterical and incapable of knowing what they're up against. Dugin also speaks in a confusing manner on purpose. Video description. Russian ideological subversion did not end with the fall of the USSR, it merely changed its approach. Alexander Dugin's neo-Eurasian ideology is now targeting impressionable minds of the far right in particular, but also in certain corners of the far left, i.e. Syriza. Some sources. Sadly, there is little qualitative writing in English about Dugin and or Duginism. Part of that is intentional. Duginism is not meant for English speakers, and part of that is simply because most of the writing in English comes from fans, which is problematic to say the least. When it comes to understanding Russian philosophy and ideology, one YouTube user recommends Philosophical Letters and Apology of a Madman by Pyotr Chadeyev. An article I highly recommend reading is Should the Alternate Media Support Putin in Russia? Though it's aimed at it really is aimed at more of a right-wing audience, unlike this article, which is aimed at more of a left-wing audience. When it comes to Moscow's claims of denazifying Ukraine or fighting fascism, if you know about Alexander Dugin and his ideas, you know that is insincere. It's easier to call your enemy a name and to simply fight an enemy than to fight for an objective value, such as individual rights, for example, which governments don't do because upholding individual rights would mean going against their own interests, less power for themselves. Hitler can say he was fighting Stalinism. Stalin can say he was fighting Nazism. Both are militarist totalitarians who do not value human life or even basic human dignity. I'll talk about what this had to do with the themes of 1984 later. Part 3. China. Where do I even start? This will have to be broken up into multiple parts. Part 3.1. China's relationship with Israel. People's Liberation Army Navy Destroyer, King Dao, hull number 113, docking in Israel. Flickr, Israel Defense Forces, 20 years of cooperation with the Chinese Navy. The Israel Navy congratulates the Chinese Navy on docking at the Haifa port. On August 13th, 2012, the Chinese vessels arrived at Israel in order to celebrate 20 years of cooperation between the Israel Navy and the Chinese Navy. Rear Admiral Yang Junfei was welcomed by the Haifa-based commander, Brigadier General Eli Haisharvit, upon his docking. Flickr, Israel Defense Forces, 20 years of cooperation with the Chinese Navy. E2. 20 years of cooperation with the Chinese Navy. Israel Defense Forces. Here's footage of that exact visit, again from the Israel Defense Forces itself. What a People's Liberation Army Navy ship, King Dao, flying the Israeli flag while docked is not unusual, as that it is a maritime tradition for a ship to fly the flag of a country she is docked in. Notice how many Israelis were carrying flags of one-party totalitarian state that is the People's Republic of China. How many Australians, Americans, or Mexicans you see wave Chinese or Russian flags whenever a Chinese or Russian Navy or Coast Guard ship visits an Australian, American, or Mexican port? And for good measure, the banner says, China loves Israel. One of Israel's open secrets is that it exports military technology to the People's Republic of China. The best example of this is the Chengdu J-10 jet fighter, which is a variant of the Israel Aerospace Industries LAVI, which uses American technology and was canceled probably due to pressure from either the George W. Bush or Clinton administration. The PL-8 missile is also a licensed clone of the Israeli Python 3 missile. Here are some articles, all from mainstream and some government sources. U.S. up in arms over Sino-Israel ties. Asia Times. Israel-China relations and the Falcon controversy. Middle East Policy Council. China naval modernization. Implications for U.S. Navy capabilities. Background and issues for Congress. China's new strategic cruise missiles from land, sea, and air. International Assessment and Strategy Center. Okay, and here's just a whole slew of articles, which you see on screen, or you can click the linked article below or go to the article's page and see for yourself. But wait, there's more. The Israeli government is also allowing China to take over the port of Haifa, Israel's largest seaport, which would make it easier for China to influence world shipping and allow the People's Liberation Army, Navy, and China Coast Guard to send ships and conduct surveillance around the world. China, the port of Haifa and Mideast peace, the Times of Israel. Could Chinese involvement in Israeli ports pose a security risk? Jewish News Syndicate. Chinese companies set to manage Haifa's port, testing the U.S.-Israeli alliance. Jewish News Syndicate. A whole bunch of other sources. Again, you can see in the article linked below, or you just go to the URL. Here's video. China's J-20 stealth fighter gets its U.S. F-35 technology from Israel. The Chinese Communist Party pays lip service to Palestine while buying weaponry and military technology from Israel, and has allowed Uyghurs to fight the secular Assad government in Syria. However, I don't consider China and Israel to be true allies. Their relationship seems to me to be more like business partners rather than lovers. The reason for Israel to do business with CCP-controlled China is because the CCP doesn't care about human rights abuses because they're a bunch of greedy bastards. But on the flip side, the CCP will not sacrifice Israel for Israel either, because they're a bunch of greedy bastards and only want money and power. Unlike the West, which has an unbelievable guilt-driven relationship with the Jews, which leads to its unbelievable guilt-driven relationship with Israel, where no one will seriously criticize Israel, and criticizing Jewish culture, maybe beyond circumcision, is unthinkable unless you're a neo-Nazi, an Islamist, or a self-hating social justice warrior, or something like that. If you think Israel is any better than China, think again. And as Serpent ZA points out in this video, China's ugly, disturbing, yet open secret. China racism is normal in China. Both Americans and Chinese are arrogant, a flaw of all great nations, but they are arrogant in different ways. While Americans view foreigners as wannabe Americans, Chinese view foreigners as barbarians. Americans, as with the West in general, is anti-racist to a fault, which is why it's taboo to criticize Israel. Mainland China is the complete opposite, where racism is completely normal. But wait, there's more. China's foreign policy. President Xi Jinping has claimed that China has never invaded or bullied any other countries or tried to seek hegemony. This is so easily refuted and laughable. List of wars involving the People's Republic of China. Even Ryan Dawson, who literally spent his entire adult life as an anti-war activist, opposing America's wars and criticizing American and foreign policy, is glad that America is the superpower, not China. Jimmy Derp brings on China communist propagandist. China has fought a war with India, a poor socialist republic that had good relations with the Soviet Union, taking a chunk of land the size of Switzerland. China has fought a brief border war with the Soviet Union that nearly became a full-scale war, with the decisive event preventing full-scale war being Ho Chi Minh's funeral. China has fought yet another border war with Vietnam in 1979, with skirmishes happening until 1992. China's lies, its history of invasion and bullying / blood lies in football, China's secret Vietnam War. Pol Pot's regime, which murdered almost a quarter of Cambodia's entire population, was so bad that the authoritarian Vietnamese government looks heroic by comparison. This is an example of even evil has standards. This is the South China Sea. The red line is what China claims to be its own. The Chinese Communist Party claims. Go to Indonesia and Vietnam and ask the people around which country they hate the most. It probably would not be Japan, the Netherlands, France, or the United States. It would probably be China. China versus Vietnam, the new race of the century. How Vietnam and Indonesia plan not to end up like Ukraine. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the People's Republic of China, has claimed that China does not interfere in other countries' internal affairs is a complete and utter lie. It is very, very, very well documented that China conducts operations in foreign countries not only to conduct espionage, but also go after, suppress, and if possible, bring in and arrest political dissidents. The Chinese Communist Party would never tolerate any foreign state doing such things in China. Plenty of documented examples of this. Chinese police coming to your country, in which supporters of the Chinese Communist Party impersonate law enforcement in places such as Australia and America. You can never escape the Communist Party of China, which shows how the CCP claims that it has authority over all Chinese people in the world, how mainlanders suffer abroad, how China stops overseas students hence integrating, how these university girls enforce brutal Chinese law. I'm not going to open up these links because because the room I'm in and the internet isn't great. But you can see all of them in the article. Isn't this interfering in other countries' internal affairs? Part 3.3, Human Rights in China. China is a totalitarian state. The human rights record rivaling that of totalitarian states such as North Korea, Turkmenistan, and Eritrea. But don't take my word for it. Even Al Jazeera and its subsidiaries criticized China. Al Jazeera is not pro-American or pro-West. But so they say that 95% of the Chinese people will support their government. Again, this is so easily explained. You got to watch. I was wrong? 95 of Chinese support their government? Look. Largely because it's a surveillance state, in which the individual has no rights. But I'll continue on. And so much more. How does China's social credit system work? Solution. China. Solution for public using mobile phones to film. Sci-fi film coming to reality in China. If you think that the CCP is doing this surveillance for safety, think again. I want you to watch these 3 following videos. Why a huge missing population in China / hundreds of millions of cameras can't solve systemic problems. 2.7 billion cameras for surveillance. Millions of people go missing every year. Skynet Project, AI. By China Insights and China Observer. The tragedy of missing children in China continues. Why? Ongoing civilian efforts by China Insights. After watching those videos, tell me with a straight face that you still support the CCP or that you would raise a child in China. I am at a loss for words for an organization that can conduct the very best domestic surveillance network on the planet, creating an Orwellian police state, but does not rescue children from being trafficked. Rather be for organ harvesting, sex trafficking, or being burnt and having limbs amputated to be turned into a beggar. Many upper and middle class as first worlders just don't comprehend that such evil exists in this world. And for good measure, the false safety of China. China's false sense of security also talks about how dangerous China is. China is not a safe country to live in. It is very dangerous. It's just the danger swept underneath the rug. Even when it comes to simply living in China, China is not the tier 1 cities of Shanghai, Shenzhen, Beijing, and Guangzhou, roughly in that order, that the Chinese Communist Party wants people to think of as China. China is not even just the river and coastal port cities. China is a country of 1,400,000,000 people. Actually, probably less. Yes, hundreds of millions of them still live in real poverty. Saying that you are no longer impoverished if you make 90 cents hence a day is like saying that you're not overweight if you are under 300 pounds. Can the third distribution achieve common prosperity? Jack Ma, 10 cent. By China Observer. Even China's own premier admits to Chinese government's financial troubles. China's premier bangs on desk in anger. Pay back the bonuses. Officials and teachers are required. China Insights. Even in China's rich cities, white-collar workers are made to endure absolutely insane working hours that the vast majority of Westerners would not tolerate. People had health problems and even died from overwork. And in Confucian culture, you're supposed to obey authority and not complain. See the 2 following videos, the latter of which comes from a mainstream media outlet. The Extreme 996 Work Culture in China, 996.007, How Chinese Young People Work Nowadays, by China Observer. The Extreme 996 Work Culture in China by Vice Asia. And those people are relatively lucky to be white-collared workers in a Tier 1 city. If anything, Serpent ZA and Lao Y86 attempted to avoid the negatives of China and really try to paint China in a positive light. But they did not give up their integrity and be dishonest about China. So they both left in 2019 and may never again step foot in the country. Just follow the channels I've linked to and watch the first few videos in the playlist I linked to. I do not feel like responding to every little argument that a Wu Mao would make or holding your hand to explain things to them. Arguing with fanatics and people who use mental gymnastics is a waste of time. In my opinion, China is the worst of both worlds when it comes to traditional and modern culture. China is the soullessness of modern culture combined with the backwardness and even cruelty of traditional culture without the morality, wisdom, or even beauty of traditional culture. The negative traits of traditional culture that China still has are collectivism, classism, racism / xenophobia, child abuse, male chauvinism, and animal cruelty, to name a few. China's lost generation is the epitome of this, who are simultaneously backwards, degenerate, and loyal to a political party that acts more like a gigantic, well-funded mafia. So much for Chairman Mao's 4 olds and 4 news. Now, I want to compare China to the Borg. We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological likeness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile. Now, we are the People's Republic of China. Shut down your defenses and surrender your states. We will add your land, technology, and resources to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile. Similarities China has to the Borg are collectivism and totalitarianism. Chinese culture is collectivist and authoritarian, with a history of totalitarianism under Qin Shi Huang, Mao Zedong, and now Xi Jinping, with now a social credit system. The Borg takes totalitarianism to its logical conclusion, with a hive mind, and replacing the minds of anybody they assimilate with their own hive mind. Chinese culture has groupthink. The Borg have a literal hive mind. High population. China is the most populous country in the world, or second most populous, depending on who you ask. The Borg's population is likewise massive. Knowledge. China is known to have absolutely extensive intelligence gathering. The videos, did Huawei ever invent anything? And China's Huawei is very dangerous. Episode 109. talks about just a single company's intellectual property and technology thefts. When the Borg hates someone, they know everything that person knows and gives the hive mind instant access. Imperialism. Already explained of China, along with the fact that CCP forces foreign films to be censored to enter the Chinese market. The Borg are constantly expanding. Part 4 commentary. Because I don't want a copyright strike, I'm going to have to read. Fake rich of China, it spends money this way. Where China's money is really going, by China Observer. Not only are there many officials, but the hidden income and benefits of CCP officials at all levels are even more alarming. According to overseas media reports, in 2007, leaders at all levels squandered 11.8 billion United States dollars on overseas study trips, cars, and food and drinks alone, which is 5 times the amount spent on health affairs that same year. There's also 8 times the amount spent on education. According to statistics, the salaries and benefits of officials at all levels account for 30% of state revenue, while Germany's only accounts for 2.7% of its revenue, and Canada and Russia account for 7%. In a 2006 report released by the Research Office of the State Council and CCDI, it was stated that the annual income of the Communist Party bureaucrats was 8 to 25 times higher than the per capita income in the local cities, and 25 to 85 times higher than the income of local farmers. This, of course, does not count the money from the corruption and bribery of the officials. A senior official of the CCDI revealed that since 2012, when Xi Jinping came to power, more than 4 million people have been investigated and punished for corruption by the nation's discipline, inspection, and monitoring agencies. For example, Zhou Yongkang, secretary of the Political and Legal Committee, he was stripped of power in 2015 because of corruption. Although the CCP announced a verdict of 20.87 million in corruption, the Chinese media revealed that Zhou's family was involved in corruption amounting to 14 billion United States dollars. In addition, there are a large number of naked officials in China, which are officials whose spouses and children have immigrated overseas, and they are the only ones left working in China. The wealth they've obtained from corruption and bribery is also transferred overseas, so they're ready to jump ship if the party faces any danger or if they find out an investigation is coming their way. In 2012, Hong Kong media cited statistics from an authoritative organization within the CCP and found that 90% of the relatives of the Central Committee members have immigrated overseas, and more than 85% of the top Communist Party officials were ready to abandon their posts and flee any time. According to the Hong Kong media, before the 19th National Congress in 2017, the number of naked officials investigated was nearly 3 times more than the original estimate of 300,000. So in other words, more than 1 million people, among them more than 485,000 party cadres, were naked officials. According to a 2018 report by China Economic Weekly, more than 100,000 corrupt officials fled China from the year 2000 to 2011, along with more than $2 trillion United States dollars. Then how much money is left to spend on public services that the people need? According to expert statistics, Chinese people receive 8% of their total tax revenue in welfare, compared to 42% in the United States, 49% in the United Kingdom, and 52% in Canada. In 2009, the average rate of out-of-pocket and medical health spending of Chinese residents was 38%, the highest in the world, compared to 14.3% of U.S. residents. Even China's own premier admits the Chinese government's financial troubles. Even in China's rich cities, white-collar workers are made to endure absolutely insane working hours that the vast majority of Westerners would not tolerate. People have had health problems and even died from overwork. In Confucian culture, you're supposed to obey authority and not complain. See the two following videos, the latter of which is from a mainstream media outlet, being the extreme 996 work culture in China, 996-6007 how Chinese young people work nowadays, based by China Observer, and the extreme 996 work culture in China by Vice Asia. And those people are relatively lucky to be white-collared workers in a Tier 1 city. If anything, Serpentier and Laowai 86 attempted to avoid the negatives of China and really tried to paint China in a positive light. But they did not give up their integrity and be dishonest about China. So they both left in 2019 and may never step foot and may never again step foot in the country. Just follow the YouTube channels I've linked to and watch the first few videos in the playlists I've linked to. I do not feel like responding to every little argument that a Wu Mao would make or holding their hand to explain things to them. Arguing with fanatics and people who use mental gymnastics is a waste of time. Part 4. Commentary. I would argue that, if anything, Duginisms and the action of the Chinese Communist Party, Eurasianism, and the actions of the Chinese Communist Party actually make neoconservative ideas seem justified, as that anything is better than totalitarian or Orwellian nightmare state. How am I supposed to convince, say, my boomer Republican dad to vote for some anti-war candidate when our Orwellian empire is trying to take over Eurasia? In 1984, the parties involved fight wars not with the intention of winning, but to justify their own existences, and by extension, poverty and an Orwellian tyranny. If you believe that censorship is justified, here's an excerpt from Another 12 Lies About Reality by What If All Hissed.
Number 8. Information can be harmful. Nietzsche once said you can judge a man by how much truth he can handle. The truth is that the truth is the ultimate arbiter of existence. Having an understanding of how things work is the most important part of doing anything. You can't be hurt by knowing information, since knowing the truth is just knowing what you'd already have to deal with anyway. Knowing that a hurricane is coming your way might lead to short-term stress, but it will allow you to prepare for said hurricane. However, across history and the world today, you see that regimes and ideologies try to shut off the supply of information, saying it will hurt the public. The truth, however, is just that information hurts these regimes and their power. I remember an amusing anecdote of how Catholic authorities in France were burning Bibles during the Reformation, for fear that people would, upon reading them, become Protestant, to which my reaction is, wouldn't you realize you're the one at fault upon realizing that the appropriate reaction to reading your source material is that you're wrong? When someone tries to hide information, it means that they know they're on the losing side of the argument but want to keep power. This is true between Tokugawa shogunate Japan, Stalinist Russia, or Inquisition Spain. You can always tell who the bad guys are based off those who vilify the truth and tell you should support party thinking above it. There's a difference between propaganda is likely relations of the massive propaganda is inherently harmful or designed to be inherently addictive. As an inverse to information, propaganda is inherently harmful. The low degree of trust in societies in the modern world is likely a result of the massive propaganda campaigns of the world wars that all out lied to their populations. Similarly, although I think they're evil, I do understand why authorities want to keep their stories about the world and filter out competing information, because said stories are how societies work, and by degrading the common myths of societies, you degrade cooperation. However, I think what people should do is edit their stories so that they can fit into new information. And that's difficult, but I think it has to be done. And also, to be true,
look at protests in any Western country, along with Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. People freely criticize their governments. In the US, you can walk into any bookshop and find books criticizing the government, even claims that the United States federal government committed 9/11. I've been on 2 field trips to the District of Columbia, and both times I saw a man protesting in front of the White House. Cases where the government persecutes whistleblowers, such as Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, are so rare that you know them by name. You see fewer protests in Russia and especially China. Do you really think it is because everyone is content with their lives? Or is it because the aforementioned regimes throws anyone that challenges them into prison? Doesn't the former sound too good to be true? Do I really need to explain why people would not want to live under an Orwellian state? What else can I say? If these people, say, went to Beijing, protested and called to remove the Chinese Communist Party, they'll be swiftly thrown in prison, and if they do get a trial, it would not be a fair one, and they're going to a hellhole penitentiary. Tankies talking about bad things that Western governments have done or other problems the West while ignoring even worse problems in Eastern Bloc countries reminds me of whataboutism/whataboutery, which the phrase, "and you are lynching Negroes" is related to, which is an example of tu quoque, an appeal to hypocrisy. Hezbollah propagandists do the same, pointing out the human rights violations in countries such as North Korea to distract from Israel's imperialism and human rights abuses, with Israel being supported by the West, especially the U.S. Zionists and Tankies are the biggest hypocrites in the world, in my personal opinion. Quote, "The Iranian Revolution was not good. They went out of the kettle and into the fire. They left a foreign corporacy only to fall into the arms of a theocratic nightmare. They traded exploited foreigners for local despots." Ryan Dawson's response to a comment on Patreon that some racist assholes advocate it for completely different reasons and motives does negate the very real suffering of Germans post-war, and the same goes for Japan. You don't have to follow the emperor or be a Japanese supremacist to have sympathy for victims of atomic bombs. Why do people have to be either or so polar? Ryan Dawson, from a comment he made on a video criticizing a white nationalist criticizing him. Now I want to talk about my favorite anti-war and general political commentator, Ryan Dawson. Considering his commentary on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the fact that he almost never criticizes the Russian state, should he be considered a tankie? No, I do not consider Ryan Dawson to be necessarily a tankie, and he is not a leftist for that matter. He is also very well aware of Russia's war crimes, back when it called itself the Soviet Union during World War II, from the documentary Hellstorm. But I think he unknowingly promotes Kremlin propaganda, as Freedom Alternative has mentioned towards the end of What is Duginism and Why It Matters. It is common for smart and good people to spread Duginism and not realize it. I talk more about it in the mainstream media and alternate media failings on reporting on Russia and Ukraine. Tankies who think that China is better than the West is an example of clown world. A meme about laughing about the absurdities of the world. When it comes to the claim that capitalism causes war, we can talk about it in the comments section of my article Capitalist Peace, which I decided not to post on anti-war Substack. We can. I'm sorry that I sometimes step on people, but if you disagree with me on capitalism, that's fine. I can respect that. Anyways, I'm sorry that I sometimes step on people's toes. However, if you are going to stand for something, you're going to offend someone, and sometimes if you want to get something done, you'll have to agree to disagree on some things. Part 5. Articles and a video related to the topic. My most recommended videos on topic are NATO and anti-NATO, two sides of the same coin, by the Corbett Report, and Marxist-Leninists / Tankies, a quick response. My most recommended article on the issue of China is the CCP is not progressive. Have on Tanky Jerk, on the Tanky Jerk subreddit. A good thing about this content, and a whole bunch of other linked articles, a good thing about this content being made by leftists is that, since Tankies are leftists, maybe fellow leftists could connect and appeal to them better than non-leftists. Part 6. How to deal with Americans and Westerners. I'm sorry for what my government has done to your people. That being said, Americans have been lied to, not evil. We will not support wars if we have not been lied to. Muslims, if you hate the U.S.'s support for Israel, you can start by talking to non-Muslims respectfully. Some Muslims are disrespectful to non-Muslims. Jew bashing will absolutely destroy your optics, your public image. Drop the tribalism. Seriously, your tribalism is how you have this much territory against one of the smallest countries in the world, and you still somehow fail. The Israelis are laughing their heads off at you. I'll get back to talking about tribalism in a minute. Take a hint from the East Asian countries, specifically countries like Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and even Vietnam, and have good or at least cordial relations with the West instead of hating the West. Having cordial relations does not make you a puppet state. Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan all have their own military-industrial complexes separate from the U.S. They don't buy everything from America or the West. Singapore and South Korea had only token, insignificant deployments in the Persian Gulf, Iraq, and Afghanistan wars. Japan has only done anti-piracy and peacekeeping type of deployments and not combat deployments. And Taiwan has not been involved in any American wars since the Vietnam War. South Korea and Japan and both routinely do business with Iran, namely buying oil, which is an enemy of Israel and Saudi Arabia, and doing things like exporting machinery to make quiet submarine propellers to the Soviet Union, and does not sound like something an American puppet state would do. That's a reference to the Toshiba Konsberg incident. Japan has given hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to Palestine and Syria, albeit as a way of giving money to Japanese construction companies. Japan has helped Palestine more than China and Russia combined. I'd argue that it's in your own interest to have good relations with the West. Just look at how developed and rich Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan all are. The last three are big technology exporters to the West, and Japan is especially notable for its cultural exports. South Korea went from being one of the poorest countries in the world to being well within the 15th largest, now 10th economies, and is now the 10th largest economy in the world, having a larger economy than countries such as Mexico, Brazil, or Russia, all of which have much larger populations. Singapore went from being nothing to one of the richest countries, the highest standards of living on the face of the planet in a single generation. And Taiwan went from being even regionally weak to a major technological power, possibly even technological superpower in the world by developing, manufacturing, and exporting semiconductors. If you don't want to look to the kafir for examples, and need examples from fellow Muslims, look at Morocco, Turkey, Albania, Jordan, Malaysia, Brunei, and to a lesser degree, Indonesia. They all buy Western military hardware. Turkey still uses the iconic American M1 Garand rifle and M1 helmet for ceremonial use. and Morocco is the only country on the African continent, other than Egypt, to have the M1 Abrams tank and F-16 Fighting Falcon jet fighter, and has conducted its training with Western military forces. Relations between the Kingdom of Morocco and the United States of America date back to the American Revolutionary War, and specifically since 1777, when the Sultan Muhammad bin Abdallah became the first monarch to help the United States. Albania and Turkey are members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and Malaysia is a member of the five-power defense arrangements with Singapore, which it has strained relations with. Turkey has gotten into fights from territorial disputes with Greece and Cyprus, and Indonesia has had several military confrontations against the West, but they have not held grudges and isolated themselves against the West. Here's the Moroccan-American Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Turkish soldiers in the Korean War. U.S. Air Force Special Tactics Commandos training of Jordanian and Special Operations Forces. David's images. Malaysia Amphibious Assault. Malaysian Armed Forces doing training of the U.S. Marines. An Indonesian officer visiting the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Disclaimer: this content is not endorsed by the United States Department of Defense. Then again, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia are in Southeast Asia and not the Middle East. Morocco is far away from Israel or Saudi Arabia and do not come in conflict with them, which is part of the reasons why they have better relations with America and the West. A country cannot act coherently if tribal identity is stronger than the national identity. A reason why Syria has had a better time standing up to Israel compared to other Arab states is because of civic nationalism, which lets it act in a coherent manner. You are not a Sunni, Shiite, Christian, Kurd, or X tribe, Y tribe, or Z tribe. You are a Syrian. Likewise, if you don't see, say, Japan successfully get subverted by Chinese intelligence services, the same way that, say, the U.S. intelligence community has hijacked legitimate Syrian reform movements and turned them into forces to weaken and destroy Syria. This is because the Japanese have strong social cohesion. They are a high-trust society. They are not a bunch of tribal rabble. Many of these points were made in a talk from anti-war activist historian Dawson and half-Persian journalist Andrew Illingworth in a video called Iran, though it's actually more like an audio recording, which I really want Muslims to go listen to. A reason why the West is so successful comes from the ability to be organized, which comes from having a more forgiving culture. In contrast, the desert nomads that live in atomized tribes. Westerners are capable of cooperation because people judge each other as individuals and not groups, and have a culture of forgiveness. Being forgiving may not be so important on an individual scale, but it is crucial on a societal scale if society is going to function. The constant cycle of violence from vengeance is the reason why Africa and the Middle East are fucked up. To solve conflict in Africa and the Middle East, someone must take the last hit, say nothing is enough, and end the violence. Recommended videos: collectivism, multiculturalism, religions. Just watch. UK bombing, reaction, and thoughts about assimilation. OMG, he offended me, and I ran. And I might edit those into this. The reason behind Middle Eastern and Northeast African people being so bad at dealing with outsiders is because their cultures were nomads for millennia and never had to get along with people outside their tribes. Momentum and extreme social conservatism is how they are stuck in a tribal mindset in the industrial age when you need diplomacy in order to get power and have anyone outside your tribe take you seriously. The strategic weakness I see with conservative cultures is that they are good at making enemies. One part of this comes from a combination of strongly valuing purity and loyalty. We've seen this happen with the Crusaders losing potential allies, such as the Byzantines and the Emirate of Damascus for not accepting Catholics, the German National Socialists not compromising on their racial views and thus losing most of Eastern Europe as potential allies against the Soviet Union, the modern Islamist Wahhabi movement alienating non-Wahhabis, or the Imperial Japanese making terrible decisions, such as declaring war on countries 12 times their population and casually committing atrocities, such as torturing and murdering civilians and prisoners of war, headhunting, the rape of Nanking, and general war rape, medical experimentation on live victims of Unit 731, and so on. This is talked about in The Six Most Extreme Societies Ever, or Wheel One, by Waterfall Hist. Another part of this is that conservatives tend to be more tribal and provincial, or in other words, have a particularist mindset, while leftists tend to be cosmopolitan or universalist mindset, which is why conservatism is strong in rural areas and island societies, while leftism is strong in urban ones. On a subconscious level, conservatives think that they are fighting an enemy tribe. Conservatives subconsciously associate humility with weakness. Conservatives' hatred of being perceived as weak probably comes from tribal human nature, in which having a tribe being perceived as weak by enemy tribes means that your tribe gets attacked more and is more likely to be killed. This also explains why conservatives are so obsessed with masculinity, and particularly why Trump has a far stronger cult following than better-spoken, more articulate, and more intelligent figures such as Ron Paul. This also relates to honor culture, which, for example, having a reputation for giving violent retribution against anyone who steals your herd animals is a way to discourage theft. The same would definitely apply if you are a desert nomad who cannot afford to have your food and water stolen from you, or you will face starvation, dehydration, which are absolutely terrible ways to die in the desert. It is actually neurologically, scientifically true that conservatives have larger amygdalas than leftists, and why they find more threats in the world. We are also little more than hunter-gatherer apes, which is why we default to thinking and acting tribal and irrational. What conservatives are looking for is comfort through stability, which makes sense in this chaotic, scary world. To have a better psychological and sociological understanding of conservatives, here are some videos as to listen to and articles. Videos. How Evolution Created PTSD by Dr. Hector A. Garcia. The Origins of War and Child Abuse. Lloyd DeMoss and Stefan Molyneux. Articles. 12 Proven Facts How to Spell Honor Cultures. 5 Types of Honor-Shame Cultures. We can either be rational, civilized human beings, or just be shit-throwing primates. And look at you tribalists out there. End quote. One thing I learned traveling the world when I was contracting with the Department of Defense was that if you treat the locals in a respectful manner so that they see you as a friend, the less likely they'll try to kill you in your sleep. Not only that, they're more likely to open up and talk about things they shouldn't, which can be quite the intel bonanza. Not only that, it's just mentally easier to treat people nicely, and you leave a good impression of your country on them that can benefit your fellow countrymen who may be traveling in your footsteps one day. YouTube user, end quote. YouTube user Eyeball Nanya. When it comes to having a victim mentality and using it to justify inaction or even negative behavior, here's an excerpt from King of the Hill, Khan Gives Up. Now, I'm certainly willing to believe that there are people who exist that just want to dismiss victimhood, and that some of these people are willing to use the concept of victim mentality in order to do that. But that doesn't mean that victim mentality itself doesn't exist, nor that it isn't harmful. Khan and Connie are a perfect demonstration of the difference between being a victim and having a victim mentality. They're both victims of prejudice. In fact, they're both victims of the same prejudice, being overachieving Asians. However, we call out Connie's reaction to being told she didn't make it into Rice. No matter what circumstance she was in, Connie always focused on bettering herself. She didn't let not getting into Rice stop her from studying, nor did she let her parents losing it drag her down with them. Meanwhile, Khan let the fact that he was a victim define his circumstance. He knew doing certain things was wrong, but he did them anyway because, as a victim, he felt entitled to doing them. Having a victim mentality does not depend on actually being a victim. Anyone, victim or not, can have it. Having a victim mentality is about seeing yourself as a victim and using that to justify immoral and or irresponsible actions. It allows one to excuse their own flaws and prevent themselves from improving. What I mean to say is that do not let being a victim mean that you do not at least try to gain diplomatic skills, pick up the pieces, and work with people outside of your tribe. If you oppose war, support the alternate media. If you are an American citizen, send letters and call your representative in Congress. If possible, go to the District of Columbia and lobby Congress, which is the most effective thing you can do. Whenever you talk to American Republicans, who are the real war-supporting demographic, both in voters and the military, tell them how supporting Israel in war hurts their country. Do what I did in the article, Israel, Zionism, Judaism, and the Jewish People. Show them how Israel sells American military technology to China. Show them the dancing Israelis. Show them the Israeli abuse of Christians. Show them the Israeli government's immorality. And show them how expensive the neocon foreign policy is, such as with the article, U.S. spent $5.6 trillion on war, whereas in Middle East, Eastern Asia, steady. Part 7. My concerns for the future. What both Moscow and the Chinese Communist Party are taking advantage of is the West's current religious civil war.
The big issue with Russia is that in the long term they make much more sense as an American ally. The Russians should economically and culturally be integrated into the rest of Eastern Europe, for purely geographic reasons at least. The only reason they aren't allies now is due to hang-ups in the parts of the Americans. China has an immense demographic advantage as of now in sheer population size. When you have a population of 1.4 billion people, you can easily swamp Central Asia's 72 million and Siberia's 34 million. If the Chinese were young, they could populate a massive region of Asia, thus making their empire effectively permanent. The best thing China could do would just be to clean up corruption. The Xi regime has been doing a good job of this, but mostly on a local level, while it seems like the Chinese government continues to allow corruption at the top level. Again, another possibility here is that Xi is just using the corruption card to know what whoever comes inside the Communist Party will do. However, a high degree of centralized authority just begs for Caligulas and Neros. Absolute power authorities don't just automatically, which will protect the US against them. China the world so that any can see in the long term. China needs to be seen as an honest, non-thuggish nation by the world so that any successful countries don't just automatically side with the US against them. China needs to be seen as a nation where your money is safe, which will protect global shipping and follow rule of law in order to not become another Soviet Union. A huge card that could end up helping the Chinese is the crisis of leadership that's currently happening in the West. The Western nations are now in a basically religious civil war between the right and left, which consumes most of their population's excess energies. Much of the Western elite hates itself so much that it's incapable of acting effectively. If the West doesn't sort out its social issues within the next 10 years, China wins. Incoherent elites have allowed nations which are materially much weaker to make huge gains. The Manchus were able to conquer China with 1/100th of China's population in the 17th century, since Chinese society was so fractious at the time. A similar thing can be said of the British conquest of India, the Spanish conquest of the Aztec or Inca empires, or the Roman conquest of Greece.
To paraphrase what was said in A Historian Explains Generation Z, in history, despotism is often buttressed by social isolation and fragmentation. Freedom is maintained by strong individuals, communities, and values that keep despotisms at bay. Look at the absolutely unbelievable corruption in Latin America, where people often do not even trust their own neighbors, with similar conditions in southern Italy. In the entire continents of Africa and Asia, tyrannies were driven by societies where people lived inside of clans and or tribes, and rarely associated outside their social networks. If we want our freedom to survive, we need to be able to stem this. According to a 2021 survey, data compiled from YouGov, Nationscape, and the Voter Study Group, 36% of Republican and 33% of Democrat respondents say that they feel justified to use violence to advance political goals. This represents a sharp increase from 2017, in which only 8% of Republican and 8% of Democrat respondents had said the same. Feelings of political violence rise. Statista. Similarly, a survey performed by the University of Virginia Center for Politics found that more than 80% of both Democrats and Republicans believe that the opposing party poses a clear and present danger to American democracy. Overall, more than 80% of survey respondents said that they are afraid they or someone close to them will experience personal loss or suffering due to the effects of the opposing party's policies. Majority of Trump voters believe it's time to split the country in two. No new poll finds. Business Insider. American decline. Political polarization. Wikipedia. If you have any doubts that the West is in a religious civil war, well, whatever. Anyways, I have a feeling that now in the 2020s, people's heads practically explode whenever they're faced with political views that are different from their own. Even a non-political YouTuber, Mr. Who's the Boss, has noticed this. I'm worried about humanity's future. This also reminds me of 1984's 2 Minutes of Hate, in which members of the party express hatred for designated enemies of the party. This is an excerpt from A Study of Decadence, When Societies Commit Suicide, by What If Alt Hist.
What's happened in each of these decadent societies is that ideological structures develop to please other people rather than actually accomplish things. These ideological structures in fact try to push people away from the disagreeable real world, instead trusting their ideological documents above reality as people see it. This is a way to push away the anxiety of knowing the world they've created is fake. Way. With average people so cut off from the mega decisions that would determine their lives, they start to become passive, fatalistic, and lose hope. Populations here stop being proud of their societies and have to be whipped into battle, basically. When people wonder why South Italians don't trust their government at all, or so much of the money the US put towards Iraq was spent corruptly, it's that these were the heartlands of decadent empires that screwed their populations over so much that no one trusts anyone else. This happened to differing degrees around the world depending on how parasitic the regimes involved were. What we see with decadent societies often do have a degree of self-loathing, and it might be subconscious sometimes, and it might be fully conscious. And the modern West's self-loathing is the furthest out example of this in any in history. And this comes from people realizing the decadent society and the cultural worldview it establishes isn't the real one. So people start to loathe that and try to tear away at the society's foundations so that they can get more in touch with reality. But the truth is that such attempts normally do more harm than good because they don't see what societies fundamentally need to survive and what aspects of that society are necessary. It becomes a deep emotional loathing rather than a realistic attempt to reform the society in a way that actually works. Empires falling and the Germanic barbarians are out military. Let's jump to another example. The Roman Empire's falling and the Germanic barbarians are outside a city in southern France. The defenders don't provide any defenses and are in fact working with the barbarians against their local rivals only to have their city sacked. It was incomprehensible that the barbarians could be a real threat after Rome had been strong for so long. It had been centuries since non-Roman threats had been in the area. In all these cases, we see a shared subset of decadence, which is the sheer disconnect from fundamental reality that's manifested here through the utter inability to deal with the real world of literal barbarians coming and destroying everything these people loved.
I see this decadence with both Tankies on the left and Eurasianists/Duganists on the right, in which political radicals are supporting foreign states against their own domestic opponents. We're a society where there's more talk in the media about some incident in a local school district, like Loudoun County, than the fact that our government has created a brutal war in Syria and is complicit in Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen. Now, will Europe stand up for itself? I'm worried about Europe and rather not Europeans will stand up for themselves. The video, The 6 Most Extreme Societies Ever, we're on, from 13 minutes in to 16 minutes 23 seconds in, talks about how the modern West values harm, or the belief that harming others is the worst thing possible over any other value. I'm worried that Western, and by extension, and Northern Europe, since Denmark, Norway, and Sweden share the same progressive values about harm and comfort as Western Europe, won't put up a fight against Putin's Russia, considering how the lives of Western Europeans have become so comfortable and easy. You can see this in comments and some videos such as Gun Gripes number 103, The Sheep Mentality, UK to ban kitchen knives, Sacrificing freedom for security, elderly NYC store clerk arrested for defending himself against abusive criminal, FNYC, self-defense laws, minimal force to protect criminals. Take the URL of any one of those videos, put them into YouTube comment finder, and search Europe. Also, in Germany in 2012, there were attempts to ban circumcision, which were unsuccessful. This doesn't give me confidence that Europeans have the willpower to stand up for their values and principles. Look at those comments. Think about them for a minute. Are you confident that those people who oppose self-defense, are psychological ready to give up their cushy lives of comfort to confront Russian troops carrying assault rifles decked out in body armor and camouflage, supported by tanks, armed helicopters, and jets? I'm not prescribing positions that you should have on weapon laws, hate speech laws, social justice, circumcision, the welfare state, or immigration. This blog/forum is only for foreign policy, but I do intend to show my concerns for Western Europe's mental health, which affects whether or not they're willing to give up comfort to stand up for values and principles. This isn't the first time that Europeans have fallen to barbarian invasions. Julius Caesar has written about how the Gauls in modern-day France went soft due to urbanization and contact with Roman luxuries, and were losing out to the more savage Germans, which had neither. 20 centuries later, the successor to the Gauls, the French, surrendered to National Socialist Germany, one of the most evil regimes in the world, after the Soviet Union and Imperial Japan, despite the fact that France had a chance of beating Germany, the forgotten in 1939 invasion of Germany. What if France never surrendered in World War II? Eastern Europe has more of a will to fight back, but less the means to fight back due to their smaller populations, hence along with poorer economies. He's the exact opposite of Western Europe, which have larger populations, larger economies, more industry, which gives them the means to fight back, but they lack the will to fight back. Modern-day Northern and Western Europe's taboos around violence, even in self-defense, reminds me of the Adventure Time episode Crystals Have Power, in which Jake injures his friend Finn in a tough guy contest, and after which Jake has a non-violence vow. The Crystal Guardians come and take Finn, put him into a crystal bubble, and zap and turn him into a crystal. Jake fails to overcome the Crystal Guardians in time, even though he can easily overpower them and rescue Finn, solely because of Jake's pacifism. This must be weird coming from an anti-war blog/forum. I'm a non-aggressionist, not a pacifist. The difference is that a pacifist is against all violence, or at least war, while a non-aggressionist opposes violence in all cases except for self-defense. But I don't believe that all hope is lost. Quote, "Human beings are really tough beings when pushed. Having hiked the Appalachian Trail from personal experience, I have seen the shocking transformation of relatively soft city people turning into people who can handle shocking amounts of suffering and discomfort. I know comparing the Appalachian Trail to a nuclear war is silly, but you'd be shocked at how people you'd consider to be basic frat girls can in a matter of weeks transform into badasses who can walk 30 miles a day, entirely live off ramen, deal with bears and horrifying weather, live without any civilization, and for a week, improvise failures in equipment, and still have the energy to help other hikers in need." It's entirely possible that the same Europeans who wouldn't fight back against someone invading their home and would defecate in their pants at the thought of their neighbor having a gun would all of a sudden stand and fight when faced with an existential threat. I'm also confident that the Europeans, if they have to, can build strong, well-funded, high-quality militaries. Considering that Italy alone has a larger economy than Russia, and most of Europe being a high-trust society and of far less problems, would also help this. For reasons I have to explain in the next part, I have cautious optimism that totalitarianism will collapse. Okay, update. I've listed the parts of this article towards the top. I've also posted sources to use about China, both in this article and this article. The reason why I have this article open is America the most free country in the world. What's so great about America? On my America versus the World substack.substack.com. That's for people who think that China is safer, freer, and is better at human rights than America and the West. Now, if you agree with this message, please go to antiwar.substack.com/p/sources is for more sources, along with links to articles and videos. That was to oppose war and support world peace. Here's my social media link tree, which I ask that you keep the link and archive my content, and please, to make sure that YouTube, Google does not monetize this video.
Listen, you son of a bitch. What the fuck's your problem? You want to sit here and say that I'm a goddamn fucking Russian? You get in my face with that, I'll beat your goddamn ass, you son of a bitch. You piece of shit. You fucking goddamn fucker. Listen, fuckhead, you have fucking crossed the line. Get that through your goddamn fucking head. Stop pushing your shit. You're the people that have fucked this country over and gang raped the shit out of it and lost an election. So stop shooting your mouth off claiming I'm the enemy. You got that, you goddamn son of a bitch? Fill your hand. I'm sorry, but I'm done. You start calling me a foreign agent, those are fucking fighting words. Excuse me.
Because as Google does not believe in free speech, along with its ties to BlackRock and Oracle. Oracle collects Oracle data mines info on billions of people, and BlackRock is crushing small businesses. Has to try to create a monopoly for itself. I don't want to give Google ad revenue.